Hi, I'm Brian Wessinger. It's great to be at Email Camp today, talking to you about yet another email acronym, but one that I think you'll really enjoy learning about and finding out why it might impact your marketing efforts to increase engagement in your program and interest in your campaigns. So, some quick background about myself. I lead alliances and partnerships at Redsift. We are a cybersecurity company that focuses on helping companies implement other acronyms like DMARC and VMCs and SPF and DKIM, acronyms that you've heard in perhaps some of your efforts around deliverability, ensuring authentication of your email campaigns sent from MailJet and MailGun, and perhaps use email on acid to test your deliverability through that platform. So a lot of what I'm talking about ties into deliverability concepts, and I think will make sense based on some of the work you've already done to authenticate your marketing programs. I've been in the DMARC space since it started around 2012. Prior to that, I spent many years at Return Path on the deliverability side of things as well. So hit me up on Twitter at bwesnage, or feel free to drop me an email at my email address below. All right, so BIMI, what's it stand for? Brand Indicators for Message Identification. So it's a mouthful, but the idea is that take the default avatar next to the from address in a mail campaign, either in a mobile client or a webmail client. Typically, you'll see it. It'll be some initials a lot of times of your brand or the sender. Sometimes the mailbox provider might take a guess as to what the logo is that your company uses. Well, BIMI takes the guesswork out of that and replaces that default avatar slot with your own trademark logo. So it's an additional opportunity for branding and getting brand impressions ultimately. So without BIMI, you'd just see a regular avatar or maybe even a question mark avatar. And then with BIMI, you'd see your beautiful branded logo next to the from address. So whenever you're listening to any sessions, an email camp is full of a bunch of great experts with great ideas. But I think whenever you're at a conference and you're listening to so-called experts in the space, you got to think about, well, why should I care about this? Why should my company care about this? What's the impact on my business? Never do something just because someone like me says, hey, you should do this. So for me, the things you want to think about and why you should care is, do I think I can get additional engagement from my logo appearing next to my from address in inboxes? Is this something that I think can drive my open rates or however else I measure engagement in my program? Click-through rates, revenue, other forms of response. Like, do I think this will actually do something? And maybe I want to test it as well. So there's ways you can test BIMI at no cost, and then decide whether or not you want to move forward with the full-scale implementation. And then finally, I think another reason you might want to care is, hey, as we'll talk about today, when you want to leverage BIMI, you actually have to ensure that your mail is properly authenticated. Authentication is one component to good deliverability. Certainly, it's not the only component. I wouldn't say it's even necessarily the most important component, but it is a important component to good delivery. And it's something that you want to make sure not only your marketing campaigns are leveraging, but also other mail sent from your organization, one-to-one corporate mail or mail sent from other cloud platforms that are not marketing platforms. So one really exciting innovation in the BIMI space is if you use Gmail or Google Workspace at work, you probably have started seeing these little checkbox next to the from name. And that checkbox in Google and now in AOL, and Yahoo has a version as well, that is BIMI with what's called a verified mark certificate. So it is a mark of authenticity. It's a mark that the mail is legitimate and wanted. And also it gives you, we could probably debate verification symbols, and Twitter certainly, or X, went through some interesting verification debate. But in email, verification, I think, is probably less controversial. It allows your campaign to stand out, and again gives you that extra bit of authenticity and legitimacy that'll be super useful in getting your campaigns to stand out in the inbox versus everything else. So it's early stages for BIMI. So Google has been live with BIMI a little over 2 years, Yahoo a little longer than that. So I wouldn't say there's a huge corpus of case studies yet on BIMI and something I'll talk about called verified mark certificates. But Reds have actually commissioned a study of consumers with our partners in trust, who are the entity who issues what's called the verified mark certificates. So I'll talk a little bit more about. But what we found when showing consumers email campaigns with logos displayed and without logos displayed next to the from address, when you actually do have the logo display in your email campaign, we found it led to an increase in brand recall. Certainly, it led to an increase in open rates. And then for retailers, it led to an increase in purchase interest. So again, your program may vary in terms of how you measure ROI and engagement and results, but these are three fairly, I would say, common and standard metrics that a lot of marketers would care about with their programs in terms of wanting to drive any of these levers for the program. So again, your mileage may vary. Your own programs, of course, are going to be unique to the way you gather your list and your content, your segmentation, and what line of business your company's in. But I think it's safe to say that when you see logos in email, you will see a corresponding increase in response, however you choose to measure that. In terms of RedSift customers that we work with that have implemented BIMI, there's a large pizza brand that we work with, and for them, like a 1% increase in their read rate of their campaigns leads to $1 million in additional revenue. So for them, just moving the needle a tiny bit on BIMI and increasing the read rates of their campaigns, was a significant amount of revenue. And in the grand scheme of things, the cost of implementing BIMI was fairly affordable compared to other digital marketing activities. For a travel company we worked with, they actually, the marketing department had heard about BIMI before the IT department had heard about DMARC. So BIMI was kind of driving the DMARC project rather than the other way around. DMARC a lot of times is driven by IT organizations, security organizations, to try to stop spoofing and to authenticate legitimate mail. Well, I think I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think the most successful BIMI projects are typically ones where it's a partnership internally between various stakeholders. It might be marketing, might be IT, and it might be security. So each of them has a part to play in the process, and each of them will benefit in different ways from implementing BIMI. And I'll talk a little bit about that more shortly. So who has implemented BIMI? Well, RedSift actually keeps track of this information at a website called BIMIradar.com. So you can see a number of logos across many different verticals on this list. Certainly, retail, travel, hospitality, financial services have all been early adopters of BIMI, but I've seen BIMI be adopted by nonprofit organizations, higher education, governmental organizations. So it's not just the typical suspects you would think of that are leveraging BIMI. I've seen it all size companies, all vertical markets, all around the world. So it's definitely something that's available to the smallest companies up to very large enterprises. And if you want to take a quick scan at BIMIradar.com, you'll see who has been issued BIMI certificates recently, and just to get a sense of what kind of companies are adopting it. Another reason why you might think about BIMI is, hey, who am I mailing? Who who is part of my list, right? And for most folks, Google is going to be a very important mailbox provider that they're mailing to, regardless if you're a B2B company or a B2C company. So certainly Google's support of BIMI has driven a ton of adoption, and the checkbox that they add in Gmail and Google Workspace. But the other major supporters of BIMI are Apple. Yahoo was a very early supporter of BIMI and on board with that. And then there's some regional mailbox providers. Zone is actually in Estonia. La Poste is in France. Cloudmark is actually a B2B mail filter. So it's interesting. I would say a variety of B2B and B2C mailbox providers are supporting BIMI today. And then there's a number of providers that say they're kind of considering it. There is some technical work involved for mailbox providers to support BIMI. They may have to change their interface a little bit to display that logo in the avatar slot. They may have to do some lookups in DNS. So BIMI is actually a DNS record that has to be looked up by the receiving mailbox provider. So there might be some work there. So certainly there's a number of mailbox providers that are kind of in some phase of implementation and looking at BIMI support. And then finally, Microsoft right now is certainly the large holdout of BIMI. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see their support in the next 12 to 18 months. So Microsoft for a long time did not send DMARC reports for their consumer properties like Hotmail, Outlook.com, Live.com. They started sending DMARC reports for those properties, probably over a year ago now. Recently, in the past few months, they started sending DMARC reports from Office 365 as well. So now that they're on the DMARC train kind of fully, I would expect to see them get on the BIMI train. And just kind of from my experience in the industry, I've found that Microsoft sometimes tries their own standards and specs first, and then gradually falls into industry specs. So those of you who've been email long enough, you might remember a protocol called Sender ID that Microsoft promoted. It was a version of SPF that kind of ran in parallel for a while, and then eventually Microsoft gave up on Sender ID and fully kind of put their weight behind SPF. So Microsoft has had some version of logo display for businesses in the past. It was called Microsoft Business Profiles originally, and then it became Bing Profiles, and it has a name still today, but I cannot remember it because it frankly is not really have any sort of meaningful adoption or use in the market today. So as I mentioned, I think Microsoft will adopt BIMI. I cannot predict with certainty when that might be, but I think it's reasonable to assume it'll be in the next 12 to 18 months. And once they do that, I mean, between Google and Microsoft, you're pretty much covered in a majority of locations with both your B2C traffic and your B2B traffic. So, or at least those two providers will be the majority of most folks' lists. So again, cross your fingers. Certainly we'll be monitoring this very closely and hope to see Microsoft get on board in the very near future. So don't want to bore this audience with the technical kind of back end of BIMI, but I think it's important to understand if you're looking at this project, you may want to, or you probably will need to enlist help from some of your colleagues internally. So, I'll try to keep this high level so I don't lose this audience, but the foundation of BIMI, as I mentioned, is DMARC. So BIMI would not exist without DMARC. Frankly, BIMI is a carrot that mailbox providers use to get domain owners to adopt DMARC. So if you're a domain owner and you adopt DMARC, you're doing your part in the world to clean up spoofing of your domain. So DMARC blocks any unauthorized use of your domain. So that's a good thing, cleans up the ecosystem, can cut down on spam and phishing and spoofing. DMARC authenticates obviously legitimate mail, but it's a good thing for mailbox providers to stop spoofing and get legitimate mail authenticated because, again, as I mentioned, authenticated mail is one signal that the message is wanted and legitimate. So most of the traffic, email traffic flowing into Google and Yahoo and Comcast and others, most of the traffic they receive on a daily basis is actually not legitimate. It's not one-to-one correspondence, and it's not your email marketing campaigns. It's actual bad stuff. So the more domain owners can take ownership over their domains and give mailbox providers the signal that the mail is legitimate and wanted by authenticating it, that's what DMARC does. That's why BIMI exists. It's to drive interest in DMARC first, and then the reward is, hey, you get this logo display, you get this verified check mark, you get this benefit of driving increased engagement in your campaign. So BIMI is kind of the carrot, get folks to adopt DMARC. So DMARC's foundation, a BIMI record in DNS is kind of the next step. So there are providers like Yahoo. If you publish a BIMI record with a logo that meets a certain file format, they will give you the logo display as long as you send mail with a sufficient good reputation that they measure, and that you send a significant enough volume that they can measure your reputation. So Yahoo just requires a specific DNS record. And then kind of the top layer of the pyramid, if you will, is something called the verified mark certificate. This is something that Google requires and Apple requires to give you that logo display. So it's an additional level of verification by a certificate authority. These are folks that typically issue SSL certificates for websites and extended validation certificates. They issue this verified mark certificate. And what they do is they ensure that you, as the domain owner, have the right to use this trademarked logo that you want to use with your domain. So it stops abuse, essentially. It's a third party that's saying, hey, we verified that you own this domain and you own this logo that's trademarked and owned by your company. So it stops me as a malicious actor from trying to go out and use somebody else's logo that I don't have the rights to with some random domain that I don't own and control. So VMCs are an important part of the verification process. And again, they are required by Apple and Apple and Google to get the logo display there. Folks like Yahoo, again, they do not require the VMC, but they'll check it if you have it. So there's no downside to having it. They just don't require it for the logo display. So verified mark certificate is the top of the pyramid, DMARC's at the bottom, and then in between is the BIMI record in DNS. Yeah, just mention this a little bit, but yeah, the trademark aspect of your logo is important. Some companies, use a different logo in their email campaigns than their actual trademark logo. Maybe they use a different version or a shortened version, or maybe their trademarked logo is actually an image along with the name of the company. So Google and Apple require that you get a trademark, or the logo that you want to use in email for a VMC. It must be a trademark logo from certain approved trademark jurisdictions. And it would be the most popular jurisdictions in the world from the most populated countries in North America, South America, Asia Pacific, and Africa. So there is an approved jurisdiction. And then again, you must use the logo and email exactly as it's trademarked. And the trademark cannot be in process. So logos can take a bit of time to register and get the trademark issued for them. So if you're starting this process, you're interested in BIMI, certainly if your logo that you use in email is not trademarked, you'd want to start that process pretty early. And then you can always test BIMI out at a provider like Yahoo that does not require the verified mark certificate. So when we're working with customers at Redshift and implementing BIMI, certainly, there's always a few common challenges. One is they don't have a trademark for the logo they're using in email. That's a pretty quick disqualifying statement. And then a second thing is the marketing campaigns that are going out over Mailgun or Mailjet maybe those are all authenticated, but in the marketing domain is in DMARC compliance. That means you have to have a DMARC policy of quarantine or reject on the domain you're using for email. A lot of times, marketing subdomains, there's no issue at all because you're using a provider like Mailgun to take care of that for you. But the organization uses a lot of other mail platforms on their top level domain that the marketing department doesn't have insight into and doesn't necessarily know about or control. This is where they're going to need support from the IT organization. So the IT organization is looking after your corporate email going out of Office 365 or Google Workspace. Maybe they have some insight into Salesforce platforms, marketing automation platforms, customer service platforms. Think about all the tools you log into from a daily basis to just do your daily work. Most of those platforms send email, and you might not have anyone in your organization that's kind of monitoring those mail streams or even knows of all of them, and isn't sure which ones to authenticate. DMARC kind of gives you the visibility and governance over all mail streams and across all of your domains. So DMARC really lights up for the organization. Hey, who's using our domain for email? Hey, we're well aware that we work with Mailgun or Mailjet, but we also need to authenticate all these other mail streams. So that can take some time to get the top level domain into compliance. If you're a really large organization, if you're a global organization, you may need to involve different parties to get DMARC compliant. And again, marketing folks sometimes have to run down who is this internally that I would work with on this DMARC and BIMI project. So I always advise customers to start with the organization internally that manages your corporate email server. And whoever manages Office 365 and Google Workspace, they are the ones that typically will know something about email platforms across the organization. Let's say they manage the SPF record for the top level domain. They will know most of the platforms that the organization is using for email because they've included them in the SPF record. And if not, if there's ones they're not aware of, then DMARC reports will light up those kind of shadow IT services, if you will. And then finally, one of the other common challenges with implementing BIMI is your logo has to be in a particular, I would say, relatively uncommon SVG file format. So there's published specs on the BIMI group working side on what you need to do to get your logo BIMI compliant, but it will require probably the services of a designer, either internally or externally, to get your logo. It's not a standard, PNG file or JPEG or anything like that. All right, well, so I've talked a little bit about implementation and challenges, but kind of the more fun stuff I would say is, how does BIMI benefit your organization? Well, how can I get the backing of IT and security to help me become DMARC compliant to get all of these wonderful BIMI benefits? Well, hey, if I'm talking to my IT team, I'm saying DMARC stops business email compromise. It stops executive impersonation. It stops those fake emails that the finance team gets with fake invoices to pay, or the CEO impersonation, or the fake gift card emails that we get, or the fake emails that we get from the CEO saying, hey, give me a ring when you can because I need to talk to you. And then you're talking to somebody outside the organization who really wants to extract money or data or something else from you. So DMARC stops your domain from being spoofed, stops any unauthorized mail being sent from your domain. So it's a great form of email governance, promotes better email security hygiene, and of course helps increase email delivery of legitimate mail once it's authenticated. And then certainly BIMI benefits for marketers. It creates a consistent brand experience for your email, allows you to control the logo that's displayed next to your avatar rather than a mailbox provider guessing or just using some initials. You control what's shown to your recipient. I would say BIMI is still in early adopter phase. So you have a leg up potentially on your competition. It's one additional lever to get your mail campaigns to stand out against the competition. It definitely stops fraudsters from trying to use your logo in spoofed emails because they won't be able to spoof your domain once you've implemented DMARC. And then obviously your email delivery of legitimate mail campaigns will be improved once you authenticate all of them. I mentioned there's not a ton of case studies yet around BIMI and VMCs. We did have one from TalkTalk, which is a UK mobile company that we work with. So I would say certainly they started with DMARC and they were heavily spoofed and targeted brand and targeted domains. So they by implementing DMARC, they blocked hundreds of thousands of malicious mails, both from the top level domain and various fake subdomains that fraudsters were using. So that was all good. They stopped, kind of shadow IT. They stopped unauthorized services that were sending on behalf of their domain that weren't authorized. And then they were like, hey, we've done all this work to implement DMARC. Let's implement BIMI and see what that does for us. So they saw basically a 4 to 6% increase in email engagement, which for them was really impactful. So again, I think the dual benefits for IT teams and marketers of a DMARC and BIMI project hopefully will lead to kind of a win-win-win situation within the organization, and will help one team back the other when it comes to securing funding and making DMARC and BIMI a priority. So if I'm in your position and if I'm listening to this and thinking, hey, maybe this is something I want to look at, the good news is your IT team may already have gotten your domains DMARC compliant. Maybe there is maybe the hard work's been done already. So one thing to check, we have a checker at redshift.com/BIMI where you can go and look, plug in your domain, and you can see, hey, has my team actually gotten our domains DMARC compliant already? And that's great. If you're DMARC compliant already, you can move on to the next step, which is, hey, do I have a trademark logo? If you have the trademark logo, then this can just be really a 1 to 2 week process in my experience. And there's an application process involved to get the verified mark certificate. It involves a video verification of somebody in your company that actually has to attest to Entrust or DigiCert via a web conference that they're an authorized representative of the company, and they attest that you own the domain and the logo that you want to use in email. So that's great. Again, step that stops fraud. And if you're already at DMARC compliance and you have your trademark, a couple of weeks to get the VMC. So it's not a long drawn out process. If you're not DMARC compliant on either your marketing subdomains or your top level domains, certainly that's going to take some time to become DMARC compliant. And then if you don't have a trademark logo, that can take some time as well. One innovation I should talk about is there's hope for companies that either don't have a trademark or maybe the logo they use in email is not the one they've trademarked. Google is in pilots right now with something called a mark certificate or a common mark certificate as opposed to the verified mark certificate. It is not going to require that the logo be trademarked. So again, if you're a company that hasn't gotten a trademark logo yet, or you use a different version of your logo in email than is actually trademarked, you may be able to use this common mark certificate or the other type of mark certificate. And it's in pilots with Google right now. I think it'll be in pilots, at least until the end of the year and maybe early next year. And it may not provide the same level of benefit. It may not give you that verified checkbox in Google, but it will definitely get you the logo display in the avatar slot next to your from address, which for most companies is going to be really important. So stay tuned. We don't have any details yet on what pricing looks like. Don't have any details about the release date per se, but just know that there is a spec in trials at Google that will help you if you do not have a trademark logo. And again, today it's called either the common mark certificate or the mark certificate. That naming convention may change as well, but stay tuned and you'll be seeing more information about this in the next 4 to 6 months. All right, so I mentioned a number of URLs and resources during the talk here. Would certainly recommend, if you want to see what companies are adopting BIMI, go to bimiradar.com. BIMIgroup.org, this is the working group around BIMI. Came out of another organization called MOG, the Messaging Malware and Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group, that's been around forever and is the same working group where DMARC was born from, as well as a lot of other industry initiatives that the Mailgun and Mailjet deliverability teams are quite involved with. So definitely check out bimigroup.org. I mentioned the domain checker that we host at redset.com/BIMI. If you go there, plug in your domain, we'll immediately tell you, hey, you're ready for BIMI, or maybe you're not ready yet because you haven't achieved DMARC compliance on your domain. So check that out as well. We have a number of blog posts on BIMI, how to implement it. Again, the case studies that we do have around the topic. How to create a BIMI compliant logo and the right SVG file format. We have a how-to video on that. A lot of other resources on BIMI and why you should care. Entrust, the certificate authority that issues the VMC, has their own informational page, entrust.com/VMC. And then finally, the working group around DMARC, from which BIMI wouldn't exist if DMARC didn't exist, is dmarc.org. So check that out as well. So if you want more information to give to your IT teams on what DMARC is. All right, so that's it. So thanks for sticking with me to the end. Really hope you enjoy the rest of email camp, and definitely feel free to get in touch if there's anything I can answer for you question-wise around DMARC, BIMI, or any other wonderful acronym in our email space. So thanks again for taking the time, and hope you enjoy the email camp.